recording this to the cloud. This is R795, week 4 of the spring of 2024 semester. And tonight, I was just a few minutes ago interviewing a candidate for a position in our department, actually having dinner with him. And I jumped in my car and drove it home as fast as I could. No, I didn't drive fast because on Sunday, I blew a tire driving a little bit fast over well, I wasn't really driving fast, just went over a pothole that was hidden by the water on Bloomington that day. And I went, and I had no tire left. So I drove slowly from the restaurant back here. We have George Veletsianos with us, who's originally from Cyprus, who got his degree, his doctoral degree at Minnesota, where it's really cold, and then traveled to the east and headed to Manchester and worked in the UK for a bit, and traveled back to the west and south to UT Austin for a bit, and traveled to the north and west and ended up in Vancouver Island for Royal Roads University as a designated distance learning chair for all of Canada. Yes, and we've got Millie with us and Alicia's joining. Okay, so then after going from Minnesota to, from Cyprus to Minnesota, he almost stopped in Indiana and was going to be my doctoral student coming to Indiana, but now he's really in Indiana in this class. So Cyprus to Minnesota to UK, Manchester to Texas to Canada, oh yeah, and back to Minnesota. So he's a professor, not only just professor, he's an endowed chair at the University of Minnesota in the learning technologies area. And he's really concerned about equity. If you took a look at his different books that he's published in the past decade or so, he's interested in equity, he's interested in digital scholarship of you and I, what it takes to be a scholar. He's interested in the learner who might be taking online classes or huge, big online MOOC kind of classes. He's interviewed some of them for publication in the British Journal of EdTech and many other places. He's published systematic reviews of the research, and I use some of his systematic reviews of the research for my research. What did our friend George find? Was there gaps in this? Oh yeah. So, hey, by the way, you could contact George and say, hey, George, I'm doing research on MOOC instructors, but I really don't have enough MOOC instructors that do a good study. And someone like George will say, no problem. I've collected 700 names of MOOC instructors, and I'll just hand them to you. I was planning to use them, but I don't need them. I got so much research going on. I'm never going to get to this. So you just go ahead and you take this starter list of 700. And we did take the starter list of 700 names, or maybe it's 800. And we expanded it to 3,000. So Mena Jew and I and Anissa Sari and others use George we call it starter text when you write, starter database when you do research. So George sees some familiar friends here in the audience. Chris Devers is with us tonight. Good to see you, Chris. So George has a book called Learning Online, The Student Experience. He's really interested in what the environment is like for learners, whether it be in a MOOC or blended learning or a micro-credential or something else. And so he's interviewed those students as the Distance Learning Chair of Canada. He's got the Emergence and Innovation in the Digital Learning Space, Foundations and Applications, an edited book. Feminist Critical Pedagogy. You know, I didn't know about that book. I'm kind of curious now when I saw that on your CV, edited with a colleague named Susan. He's interested in all sorts of flexible forms of learning. You know, when you're in Canada, you're kind of influenced by the UK a lot, and the UK people are really interested in flexible. This notion they don't call themselves instructional designers in the UK; they call them flexible learning consultants. And so, yeah, he's got that listed in there. And if you look at his Google Scholar, there is probably just a handful of people like Rick West, who's been a guest in my classes, Bryce Kimmons from Boise State, and George. They're probably the 3 people who have as high a Google Scholar scores in what's called an H index, an I-10 index, and citations of people who've been out about 15 or so years. I think that's when you graduated, maybe 15, 16 years ago, George? Something like that. So he's skyrocketed. skyrocketed above the entire field. He's got more than most people who have been in the field for 30 or 40 years. He's published. So tonight I brought him in to talk about his publishing record, talk about what kind of rituals he goes through. We can find out some tips that he can provide for all of us. I've invited both my classes because my other class is on emerging learning technologies, but the class for tonight is on dissertation proposal prep. So we can cover both. I think my students are interested in emerging technologies. They want a dissertation topic. George, I know we only have you for a half hour, and I've already spoken for 5 minutes. So I've got at dinner, I've designed a whole suite of questions, and I'll ask a couple of them, then I'll open up to the students to ask you some. And
you're so great. Thank you for the introduction. You're so nice. And I'm happy for your students that they have such an incredible person to work with, because you talk very nicely about other people, but you've done so much work across the world and you bring so much knowledge to people. So unfortunately I couldn't be your student, but I get to spend time and learn with you. So thanks for all that you do.
So George likes rainy places. He was in Manchester. He was in Vancouver Island. He likes snowy places. He's up in Minnesota, eh? And he likes the strange climates like Texas.
I like diversity.
Yeah, diversity. And Cyprus. Would you call Cyprus a rainy place or just a beautiful place?
It doesn't rain as much these days, unfortunately, but it's very similar to Texas, actually. Hot.
What? Yeah, it's hot. So why don't you fill in the gaps of what I missed? Kind of update us on what you're doing, what you're maybe working on today. It's not been published. Why don't you start with that?
That sounds great. So I came back to Minnesota in December, right? And coming to sort of a new place, it takes a while to figure out how things work, learn, how the university works, how to do, I don't know, reimbursements, what the policies are like, the new forms that you fill out, the training that you have to figure out. Come back to the US, have to figure out, how healthcare works again. So like a lot of my time is taken up with those things. But when I have time outside of all of that, me and a couple of colleagues are working on what we call education futures, which is this idea of working with people to figure out what the future education should look like to serve everyone equitably, to be better for all of us, instructors, students, policymakers. And to do that, we know that we need to talk to all sorts of people. People who are in college, people who are in high school now and are going to be going to college, policymakers, people who are not interested in going to college, right? Because by figuring out why people are not interested, you might figure out sort of issues that you might need to address in college. So that's where I'm sort of spending my time these days. But an important question that I think might pique your interest is around the idea of what's the role of technology and the future of education, right? Is it just to make things more accessible? Is it to bring people together, like what we're doing right now? Is it something different? And you hear a lot of talk these days about AI and what that might do or might not do. And that obviously comes into the equation as well. So that's mostly what I'm spending my time on these days, and trying to figure out partners and people to work with, right? Because you can't do this work alone, nor with a few research assistants, and you gotta do that at different places. Because when you think about the future of education, like in Minnesota, say, it might be different than, I don't know, Louisiana, or it might be different in Canada, and it might be different, in like the southern part of France or what have you. So, so that's really fascinating to me, sort of this idea of like how people's imagination about the future education in their own environment might differ and what similarities there might be there.
So all of you, if you have a chance, visit Minnesota. They have a lab in St. Paul, or they did, as well as in Minneapolis. And I've been over 100 universities around the world, not probably 200, 300 of them. Minnesota, the group in Minnesota, the graduate students, the master's students, the doctoral students, the most fun people ever of all the places I've been to. Literally, I like Indiana students, don't get me wrong, they're very smart. But we're talking in Minnesota, they're fun and smart. I mean, and they it's not a, you know, it's not a lot of faculty there. So they got a few faculty helping a lot of students out, and they do a great job in Minnesota. And it's a little unknown. We don't hear a lot about Minnesota in the ed tech space, but it's a jewel within the ed tech world community, and they have a lot of ed tech companies in the area that they can do internships with, and just technology companies in general. And George is doing a special issue on the future of education within technology. He'll be on my podcast show in a couple of months. You want to talk about that briefly, about your special issue and what journal and who's, I think Punya is in it, my podcast partner might be, have a piece in it. What's going on there?
Yeah. So, as I sort of talked around this idea of when you start thinking about the future of education, you need to involve, lots of other people in those conversations. My colleagues and I thought, well, we should provide a space for people to sort of, share what it is that they're thinking about when they think about the future of education. So that's how, that special issue was born. It's going to be published in the educational, it's a new journal to me.
Come on. It's your, come on.
International Journal of Educational Technology in Higher Education.
That's a good journal. I'm trying, they reject me all the time, desk rejections all the time. Oh, it's Bonk's paper. I'll reject. No,
it's funny you say that because they have rejected me too multiple times. And I guess I have to do a special issue to get in there. So
okay, I'll do a special issue.
We're doing this special issue focused on higher education futures at the intersection of educational technology and justice. And the special issue basically consists of what people are writing about and have sent in. We're gonna have, I think, between 6 and 8 papers. We haven't decided yet, but there's a couple of papers in there that are essentially speculative stories about what the future might look like. I have a couple of submissions from different parts of Europe, some Scandinavian countries, I believe. There's a paper around hope and what that can give us in designing futures. I'm stumbling a bit because we're still in the process of sort of finalizing. We had 90 submissions approximately, and we sent about 20 papers for peer review, and out of those we are gonna end up with 6 to 8.
You had 90 submissions?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of work to review 90 proposals, but I'm sure a lot of work. Yeah, it is. We've had typically about 50 in our specialties, about 45, 50, and we end up with this, 9 to 12 in the end. Yeah. But what I can do next year when I teach the emerging tech class, put that whole special issue in, because that class is built on special issues. That's all we're reading is special issues. So it used to be a monster syllabus, 100 pages. I can't update that syllabus, so it's all special issues. We'll have yours in it. So pay attention to the podcast show. You might hear from the special issue folks that George is working with. Can you tell us now, since again, I want to go through a lot of questions in a short amount of time with you. What are you most proud of your work, and what's been the most impactful of your work, and why?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. That puts me on the spot.
I'm supposed to. It's my job.
I'm really proud of the book that I did that's about learning online, the student experience. Partly because it's a bit different, right? So like every chapter begins with the story of a single student. And it might be like the student who completed, 200 MOOCs, or the student who dropped out, or the student who, was really motivated. So there's that short story, and then there's basically an analysis of the topic of dropout, of motivation, of cheating, of all these different areas. I'm proud of that because I met well, my editor was very supportive and sort of working through this different structure, which is different than most typical books. It was really fun to do, and I don't usually get to write stories, so writing stories and being able to publish them was kind of neat. So I really like that.
I
And I
agree
know
with
I
you. Writing
heard you
stories is
do
where it's at. That's my world is open book, same thing. Can you
you
tell
do a
us
lot of stuff with stories.
before you go to the next part, is that book free or not?
It's not, unfortunately, but if you want a copy, I'll send you one
Okay.
to share with your students.
I may have one. And the special issue he's doing is going in a journal that is open access.
Yeah.
So that's just want to point that out.
Yeah. So what was interesting about that book, though, was that it was supposed to be published in May of 2020. And we all know what happened in March of 2020 with the pandemic. So the publisher released it for free for those first 2 months for people who were new to sort of online to pick it up and explore it and what have you. And it was one of their most downloaded books ever. I think partly because they don't publish open access books, so they were really surprised how much interest there was. But it's the circumstances, right? Like everyone was trying to figure out what to do online. Everyone was reaching out to Kurt. Everyone was reaching out to people who do online learning at that time. We're all sort of inundated with requests for help and information and so on.
So can you tell us, I guess that was the most impactful. You said it's the most proud. Was there any
Yeah.
other thing that you've had a big impact on people that you might want to talk about briefly?
No, just working with individual people, sometimes you do things for them and it has an impact when you don't expect it. Like you mentioned, the emails that I share of that list of instructors that really helped your research, or like a student who, I wrote a recommendation letter that landed very well. Things like that are, I think, what make this job really exciting and fulfilling.
Yeah, that does happen when you write recommendations. Like it's all blah blah blah. There's times which people, the good reactions, just you never know what's going to happen. If anything, people do. So that gets me to the next question, which is the reputation management issue. You wrote a book or edited a book. I think you wrote it on digital scholarship, and you came to my other class about a decade ago through. It wasn't Zoom, maybe Adobe Connect, and you talked about the life of a digital scholar. Can you tell my students about that, about what they should be doing if they want to be a successful digital scholar? And also, can you tell us what aspects of digital scholarship have helped your reputation? Which are the things that um, have been pinnacle for you, or the key things that you've done to become so successful so early in your career?
Sure. So I think in some ways, I was lucky to be involved in digital scholarship, or sort of the use of, digital technology to share your work online, to communicate with others online, to, share your publications and talk about research on your blog and on social media and so on. I was probably, early on when this space wasn't sort of overcrowded, so that was helpful. When I was on Twitter, I got a Twitter account in 2008, right? So that was a long time ago. So, and the interface looked different. You could only write 120 characters or whatever it was. You didn't have all these like politics that you have today and all this like fighting and all that stuff. So it was just a different space. But still, you can, it's the internet, so you can do things that you can get yourself in trouble with, regardless of how, different that space is, right? So I think, we have to be mindful about the ways that we participate online, right? I think being helpful to others was always it always came back in a positive way, right? Back then, there were lots of just back and forth, people talking about their research, people sharing, giving their input, receiving criticism, that sort of thing. And I was always sort of willing to, chime in and, give my input to people.
But if
I
I look
shared
at
my
your,
work.
yeah, they share your work. But if I look at your blog, you do a lot with video. You like record what do you do those recordings in? Like you summarize your articles as a marketing mechanism to get the word out about your publishing.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that because that's had an impact on people.
Yeah. So I have a sort of, I wouldn't, how would you call it? I wouldn't call it a plan, but there's a few steps that I go through when, say, I publish a paper. All right. And usually it's paper gets published. I'll share it on my blog. All right. I'll put the abstract, I'll write a few words about what it is. And I'll provide a copy of that paper, right? Even if it's a paper that's behind a paywall, you're able to share that paper if it's a preprint, right? If it's the paper that you submitted. So I'll share it and basically make it available. So people that don't have access to the library can get to it, or people who are not at colleges can get to it. Like I've often been in meetings with educational technology companies where they're designing, say, like introductory videos, or they're doing something and they're like, we can't even get access to these papers that you all are writing about. Never mind that you write in weird ways and we can't understand them, right? And we're not gonna spend like all this time reading these 40-page papers about the kinds of things that you do. We can't even get to them. So that's one thing that I do. And then I try to translate, the 40-page paper into various formats. One format is what, Kurt was talking about, which is producing 2-minute videos of the paper, basically summarizing the main ideas, giving a sense of what it is, essentially making those ideas more accessible to people. I've done infographics, or I've done just short summaries. I've written op-eds, and I'm just gonna find that link to share. Written op-eds in newspapers, again with a similar idea, but just figuring out different ways to share the big ideas behind the papers. That link is a YouTube channel that I have where I post those videos that I create, and if you scroll through, you'll see that over time.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. We have you drawing like Daniel Pink's book Drive is drawn out. There's a guy drawing the talk out. You've got some of those in there, so you can kind of visualize the points being made, the concepts you're working with. That's really effective. I think multimedia, in effect.
Yeah, and it's really fun.
Yeah, it's really fun. It's unique. People are offering those services today, trying to get my students or my former students to buy their services so that they can have an infographic around their research and all this stuff. And some of those are not so reputable, and some I think are reputable. But do you really want to pay $1,000 to somebody to draw your research up, or you do it yourself? And George's, I think you're not paying anyone. You're doing these yourself, right?
Yeah, we're doing these ourselves. The students and my colleagues who worked on research papers with me, we write the script. It's basically a 300-word script. It translates to 2 minutes. someone, puts, it's a software that does it, right? Like someone basically finds the images in the software and puts it all together. It's essentially a timeline where you put together, short clips. So you just, you make decisions around the clips and they just all string together and becomes a video. And then one of us records the narration, usually not me because I mumble often. So we find someone, who pronounces their words clearly.
You want to show a half minute on one of those, your favorite video, just so they can get a sense of it?
Yeah, I'll show you the one that was the most surprising to me.
Okay.
Just a little bit of a backstory here. I was doing this, I mentioned it to my university and said, oh, I would be happy to do some of these for, colleagues who are trying to get the word out. And a group of colleagues wanted to do on systematic literature reviews for their students. So we did one, and it has 300,000 views. And
Wow.
I think they just hit like that sort of niche where there weren't that many videos, and there's a bunch of students on YouTube looking on ways to do their lit reviews. So the most watched video is not my work, it's someone else's work, which is kind of neat. Let's see. I don't know if we're gonna be able to see this, but I'm gonna share it.
You have to click optimize sound, optimize video at the bottom of the screen.
Oh, there it is. Cool.
Yeah.
I've never done this. That's awesome.
I can do it if I've opened up. And the other thing
I
in the
need
chat.
to, I need to install well, let's see. Can you hear that?
Conducting research can
Yes.
be daunting. There are a few distinctions that can help make it easier. First and foremost, research can be either primary or secondary. Primary research generally involves gathering data directly from research subjects and requires ethical approval. Secondary research involves gathering data that already exists.
So, that's essentially it. It goes through and describes a few things. In that case, you can hire people to do voiceovers. We hired someone to do a voiceover. And again, it's 2 minutes. It was probably, $50 or something like that. But again, much better than me mumbling through and, confusing people.
And so what tool was that were you using? Video Scribe or?
Yeah, we used Video Scribe for one of them, and we used a different tool for a different one. They're all very similar. We stopped using the one that we were because it just stopped functioning.
Why don't you show just a beginning of another second clip, just because that was really cool. Just pick any clip just so we get another sense of it.
Yeah, I've used something similar to that too. I have a Doodly that does that drawing like that too, and then I don't want to voice over either, so I use Talkia that puts it in different accents too, and you can put that into Doodly so it'll voice over everything.
Thanks, Ed. I'm
going to show you one where we hired someone to do that because this was part of a grant, and we just had funding for it just to see the difference.
The communication of science to the public needs to be stellar if people are going to be convinced to follow public health guidelines and recommendations. But science communicators face a problem. They need to better understand how people respond to scientific information that they see online. And they need to understand how people respond when scientific recommendations change.
So, just a different design, completely different topic as well. But yeah, the main idea is to, translate the research that we do in a different way for people to use it, right? Because there's different users of research, right? There's other researchers, there's instructional designers, there's policymakers, And the wider it goes, the more opportunity it has to be used by people, and that's what I've been trying to do.
I'm seeing the word translate used more than ever in the past couple of years. Systematic reviews of the research, scoping reviews, meta-analyses to kind of summarize the research. You need translators to get it in common languages. There are going to be jobs out there for people who can translate, maybe even YouTubers out there that can translate educational research. All these tools just help get it into everybody's hand. I mean, so other people can understand what it is. I should probably open it up to questions from everyone. I have questions there about dissertations and writing and all that, but I want to see it. And we have Chris Devers here from Johns Hopkins, who knows George very well. Chris, do you have a question for George?
Sure. Could you think about how research has evolved over the past 10 years and where you think it'll go in the next 10 years based on what we've learned in the past 10?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. I think one of the lots has changed and lots has sort of remained the same, but I think the expansion of sort of digital data has opened up all sorts of venues for different ways of doing research, right? Computational social science is a big thing now, right? Computational social science is the idea that you use big data for social science purposes. Learning analytics as a field over the last 10 years has exploded. Maybe it was born like 9 years ago. I don't even know. It's that recent, right? All of the tech that we're using these days embeds and gathers and automatically analyzes the data that we leave behind. Right? I don't know if Indiana is like a Canvas University or Johns Hopkins, what kind of like platform you'll use, but whatever it is, that data is, is tracked. It's then represented on dashboards in different sorts of ways. And a lot of that is for practitioners, but we use it for research purposes as well. I think there's been more and more calls to do research with people rather than on people in recent years, and with that, I mean sort of more calls for our research to be sort of guided by communities instead of researchers, figuring out what the problems of the communities are and trying to solve them. And you see this, I saw this a lot in Canada with different sort of communities that were underserved, like homeless population, people who were homeless, who were working with researchers to essentially let them know what problems they were facing and trying and using the researchers' expertise to address those problems, right? Instead of the researcher going in and saying, "This is what you need to do." So I think in our field, involving students in research about students or for students is really important. I think that's becoming more and more prevalent. As far as the future is concerned, I think there's going to be a lot around the role of AI in research. We talk quite a bit about it in terms of how it's used in teaching and learning, what role might AI take on, but I see much less around what role AI might take in research, right? In generating research questions, in generating hypotheses, in assisting with all the tasks that research teams do. And of course, there's challenges and pitfalls there and so on. But I think it's it's something that I think is going to expand a lot. And of course, the sciences use this, right? The medical sciences in particular. I don't see much in education, but I expect that to happen. Oof. That's what's on my mind right now. But I think it's really interesting how research and teaching and learning are sort of ongoing and evolving in many ways, and that we continuously have new opportunities to figure out different ways to do things. I think it's kind of neat to be in a space where, you know, you get a chance to sort of continuously learn and not be like, oh yeah, I do surveys, I'm only gonna do surveys, I'm always gonna do surveys, and this is what I'm gonna do, and I'm just gonna figure out different Likert scales. I think that's kind of boring.
Yeah.
If you're interested in sort of research methods, I think that's like a really cool space where there's just all sorts of different things that you can do to gather data.
So tell us just a quick run through of the types of research you've done, you know, using focus group survey, regression, what kinds of things?
I've done interviews, focus groups, surveys. We've done lots of work with social media data, sort of public data. You know, we've collected people's tweets, let's say, and analyzed them. We've gathered data through hashtags, gathered data from YouTube. Observations, you know, of people using software and of people participating in online environments. We've asked people to write stories and then analyze those stories. One thing that I haven't done is analyze images. You know, say of students working. I wanted to do this study where I was basically wanting to ask students to take a picture of their work environment, right? Like, what does your desk look like, right? What, you know, and there are books close by. What, you know, what's like meaningful to you? How do you set up your like, you know, remote work environment and sort of understand, you know, students' online sort of physical spaces in the online learning environment, which I never did, but that would give an opportunity to, you know, analyze the visuals. But you know, that's something that I haven't I haven't studied. I could apply, you know, traditional methods of, you know, sort of qualitative methods of analyzing things. But I think there's people that are more experts on that topic that could do much better work on it.
You've also
Yeah,
done systematic reviews of the research because I've read them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yep.
I wasn't thinking about that because, you know, it's sometimes that gets categorized into like the literature review part, but yeah,
Right. It's
done,
research.
systematic.
You're counting, you're summarizing, you're analyzing. It's research, and
Yeah.
you know, whether it's
And
qualitative.
you've done some of that too, and you've edited a special issue of systematic reviews.
Right. Yeah, the whole issue. They read it. My students, the other class, they read it 2 weeks ago in my other class. Actually, the past 3 weeks have been reading both. I've done 2 special issues on systematic reviews of the research. One came out in March in Online Learning Journal. One came out in ETRD 3 years ago or 4. Before I ask, I have one last question for George. I know he doesn't have a lot of time with us. He's had a long day, and so have I. But I'm wondering, does anyone want to ask him a question about his work, his, you know, rituals when he writes, or what would you like to find out about? Mika?
I have a question. Thank you. I have a question. So when you've collected data and you're analyzing your research, what tools do you find most helpful?
That's a good question. Yeah, it depends on the kind of study that we're doing, right? So like if it's, you know, a lot of qualitative data, for example, then Vivo is super helpful. If it's not as much qualitative data, sometimes we might use spreadsheets, right? Just because we don't need everything that NVivo provides. But the one tool that sort of we use in all of the studies that we do, regardless of the topic, is Google Docs, because we can all just get on the same sort of document and write, and we can split different parts and we can see what the other person is writing. and we can work at the same time, or independently. That's indispensable. The other one that I've used in the past when I was working with larger research teams was sort of a task management piece of software, where you can assign tasks to people, and then you can keep track of those tasks and set deadlines and so forth. That's worked. And then, just a good bibliographic manager like Mendeley or Zotero. We're using Zotero these days, but just something that can track, right? Where we write, a summary for a paper that we read, and then we need to use it in a different study. We can just, pull in that summary. We can pull in our sort of notes for all the literature. But all of that just requires, it's not just a matter of having the tool, it's also a matter of creating a system for yourself that works, right? So if you're going to summarize every paper or if you're going to summarize a paper in your bibliographic manager, you sort of got to do the same, for every paper. You got to use tags. You got to figure out a system that would allow you to, be efficient, basically.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. It's a great point. Alicia has a question for you, and I'll ask the question in a different way. Alicia.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bank, and thanks, Dr. George. I think this talk is helpful, and I'm curious about how do you foresee or envision or predict the role of AI in our future academic research work? Thank you.
Yeah, good question. I think so I tend to think of AI as sort of a partner in the research process, in the teaching process. There's obvious benefits to it, right? It can make some work efficient. It can sort of take on sort of low level tasks for ourselves, which basically means it would sort of elevate the bar of sort of the lowest common denominator, right? If AI can write an essay for us, even very basic maybe essay, then we gotta do better than that. So you can see it as sort of a stepping stone to something, right? If I'm standing right here and there's this height that I can go, imagine AI as being like, a stool where I can step on and be a bit taller, right? So that's how I see it, as basically support for the work that we do. Not to take on and replace the work that we do, but sort of to amplify and allow us to do sort of different kinds of things. I think there's lots of challenges around using AI, and we need to develop our literacies of how to use AI, how to use it equitably, how to be mindful of the kinds of things that it generates. I think those things we can learn and be critical about. Yeah, that's how I see it.
So
Thank you.
the AI bot partner that we all will have, our second self. Days like this where George might be in endless meetings, and myself, we might have a settings level of the AI bot from a 1 to 10, let's say. And days like today, we would set it up a little bit higher for the assistance level. So it's going to write my rec letters, or it's going to answer more types of my email than normal because of my time limitations, mind limitations, focus limitations. Most days we'll set it at a 1 or 2. It's only going to do rudimentary kinds of things. But it might change depending upon the situation that we find ourselves in, the level of assistance, the level of support. That's my thinking, George. And I think that will happen sooner rather than later. I think the types and forms and derivatives of the AI chatbots is going to be endless. You think of all the applications that are that you can download in the Play Store. Think every one of those was an AI bot of some kind, and it will be, in not too far away. The level of cognition allowed by the bot, you know, or low level, just doing surface level grammar and spelling kinds of things and checks and whatnot, and dumping spam emails. That's fine. That's, you know, but there are days where we'll take on more of your persona, and you maybe people interacting with it will be find it harder to differentiate if they're talking to you, or if you're on a rest and a siesta right now and you've let the bot take over for a few hours so you can get your siesta and you come back. I don't know. I'm just playing with ideas, George. What do you think?
Well, I think that's a good place to be, right? We don't know what it's gonna be like, and I think playing with ideas like you're doing is really important to figure out, you know, what is its role, what could its role be, and how can we sort of also be involved in that conversation, right? Because a lot of these tools get developed, but, you know, in some Silicon Valley office, right, somewhere, and then we get to use it. But I would love for us to be, you know, at the table when these things are designed, and, you know, be able to have, or at least give input into, okay, if you're designing this for education, these are the kinds of things that you also need to think about, right? It's not just the tool that's going to give the answer, but it's also going to be a tool that, you know, maybe you can scaffold, maybe you can ask questions before it gives the answer, maybe it invites, you know, student sort of involvement and participation, maybe it, you know, highlights different points of view. I don't know.
And gives hints in the scaffolds, you know, that just-in-time support through job aids, through questioning, Socratic questioning, or what, you could probably have different kinds of support scaffolds that could be, you know, another setting could be for that too, right? And that'd be an interesting research, you know, that the level and types of scaffolding provided by the AI bot compared to another group gets different kinds of scaffolding. It's more like Socrates and just the Socratic questioning back versus those that might, you know, provide low-level answers, support, and, you know, cede some control, the rest of control to the human in the loop. I don't know, just again, there are many forms of scaffolding that we've experimented with and done research on, including Dr. Brush, his dissertation, he's, you know, right in our department, and many other, I mean, my dissertation was on forms of scaffolding too. Now you take that to AI level and it changes the game. I mean, it gives you more possibilities to kind of fine tune what the scaffolding should look like so that you can create more personalized environments and customize, right, George?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
So I made my reservations for ARA today. So I'm gonna be in Philadelphia in April. I don't know if any of you are going, but if you are, Kurt is going.
are you
But
presenting?
if you are, or if you're at a different conference down there, please feel free to come and say hi. And
Are you
chat.
presenting?
I am. Yeah, I haven't been to ARA for 6 years.
Yeah. Last time I saw you was maybe Philadelphia and AERA. You like Philadelphia?
I do like Philadelphia. Or maybe was it Chicago, actually? I don't know. It was one of those, but it's been a while.
Yeah. I saw you and Justin Reich from MIT before my talk in Philadelphia. I don't know, it's about, well, that was about 8 years ago, maybe now. So maybe I've seen you since then, I'm sure. George needs to leave here. Do we have a final comment or question from anyone? Lena's another. So Lisa's my visiting scholar from China. Lena's my visiting scholar from China. Sung Hee's from my visiting scholar from Korea. Millie's my former visiting scholar in China. So yeah, so Lena, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, George. Thank you for your sharing, very inspiring. And I noticed in your publications, there's one on feminist critical digital pedagogy. And I'm curious about the relationship between feminism and digital pedagogy in this context and how it is manifested. Because I previously studied feminist translation studies with Professor Mona Baker at University of Manchester. So this topic brings back my memories and interest. Good, thank you.
That's a great question. So that book is a collaboration with a couple of other people, and it was mostly Suzanne's brainchild. And Suzanne does a lot of work around feminist praxis and online learning. And what we wanted to do was to invite people to think about the ways in which online learning, in some ways prioritizes some kinds of thinking than other kinds of thinking. So that the open book that you saw was basically just that, providing space for people to sort of bring the two together, right? So we were editors of that book, right? So the research is all the individual authors in the book. And we saw our role as basically, looking at the drafts that were submitted and giving feedback on people on how they could be improved. So that's how we sort of saw our role in that project. And I think the way that I approach sort of feminist praxis is to think around, what sorts of obstacles do people face that when eliminated can benefit a lot of other people in the same ways that so a typical example used in disability studies is the curb cut at the end of the sidewalk, right? So that a wheelchair can go down the sidewalk because it just goes down, right? It's not just a cement, it's not a step, right? So that design feature accommodates people who are in wheelchairs, but it also accommodates people who have trouble walking, who might use a cane, right? It accommodates children. So if we turn this back now to sort of feminist practice in online learning, we can ask, well, so what sorts of practices can we do in our online courses that would be beneficial to all sorts of people, beyond a particular audience? So that's as much as sort of like my thought process is around, that book. I hope that's helpful.
So is that open access?
Yeah, that's on the EdTech Books platform, which is a wonderful resource. And maybe I'll put a link in the chat.
And also in the chat, could you put a link to your blog? So I've sent them a link to your homepage, which is your blog basically, but you can resend that. I'm sure they'll be more interested in exploring getting the link from you than getting the link from me. So, and now after hearing you, they'll want to explore your blog and so forth. George, my other question I'm not going to ask, but if you have time tonight, tomorrow, later in the week to think about maybe what 5 or 10 tips you could give to people who are working on big projects like dissertations, to help get given you've been successful, what are things that have helped you become so successful? And so I'll just leave it as an open question for you to ponder. But the last thing I'll just ask a yes/no kind of question is, did you envision yourself moving up this quickly and going back to Minnesota when you were getting your degree, or were you thinking about staying in higher ed and being a professor and getting pretty well known within a short amount of time, or were you thinking of going a corporate route or going to government? I mean, what were you thinking?
That's a good question. Well, my dad would want me to go into government because he was a police officer, and from when he was 17 until he retired, at the time, people could become police officers without any sort of background in anything, and that treated him well. So he was always like, "You should go into government." And I don't know, that never happened. But I wanted, I think once I started doing my master's and my PhD, I wanted to sort of stay in university, college, and do something. But things happen over time, and you sort of find your way and your path, and that's how it happened. I was lucky in many ways, working with people who were productive, who made connections, helped me make connections with people. It's not just It's not just me. I mean, you have to be persistent and so on, but you also got to work with people and be kind to people. So that seemed to work well. But I wasn't thinking of coming back to Minnesota. It just happened. I mean, I'm happy it happened. You know, there's not that many. There's probably quite a lot of job openings these days in our field compared to, you know, when I was graduating. But in some ways, if you want to do this, you gotta go where the jobs are, and that's sort of how it happened to me. You know, that job in Manchester was open. I was lucky. You know, a lot of this has to do with luck. Everyone who has a PhD, like all you, everyone who goes through this process, you know, they're persistent and you know, we're all successful. Everyone, you know, all of you are brilliant people. So, you know, but you're competing with a bunch of other brilliant people. So it's like there's always that element of sort of luck. And, you know, again, like I said, being kind to people and getting to know people and all that goes a long way too.
Politeness does count also getting published. Being polite to reviewers, I tell over and over again. And Minnesota got him before Indiana. We have an opening, George, right now, but yeah, where I was interviewing someone today, the last candidate of 3, or you know, anyways, we would have loved to have you down here, but we'll get a good person. And it's good to have you back in the Midwest, in the Big Ten. You know, you're not far away, and I'll be in Minneapolis in July, I hope, and then we'll see you then. I'll see you at AERA as well in April, and maybe we can get my students to meet you before your talk. I'll look it up, and we'll come harass you. No, we'll ask intelligent questions. So let's give George a round of applause, and you know, thank him for everything tonight. It's been great having you here. Thank you, George. Anyone else want to put 3 words in the chat window for George, or just say thank you? Unmute your mics so you can say thank you to him. Mika?
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and good luck with
Yeah,
everything.
thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
So my students will stick around. I'll give you 20 tips for communicating with your committee. And if you're frustrated with your department chair, we'll talk about that too. So thanks, George.
Thanks so much, Kurt. Thanks for having me, everyone. Have a good night.
Nice.
Good night, George. Great to see you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, it was great to have George with us tonight. Again, like I said, he's been extremely productive. If he had been my advisor or my advisee, I'd have a lot more things on my resume right now because we'd be working together on so many things. Unfortunately, he went to Minnesota instead of Indiana, but I have 4 people in the past 4 years that I've been working with who are equally productive. They're brilliant people. So I'm not, you know, I've had great people here at Indiana, but he's a distinct in all the people that I've worked with. Just again, how much he's been able to get real savvy about digital scholarship and getting his research out and better understood. Before I give I'm not going to hold us too long tonight, maybe another 15, 20 minutes tonight. We'll have a shorter night. Before I go to my slides on communicating with your committee, does anyone have a comment or a question for me? Or a suggestion? See, we have Esther here. Great to have Esther with us. And so I'm just clicking around here to see who's with us. We have any comments? And so Esther, I think, is in my R678 class. I don't think you're in the 795. So you just missed George, unfortunately, just left, Esther. I'm not sure if you want to stay for the next part, which is more focused on the R795 students. I think Tehran's in here too. Hi, Tehran. I think you might want to leave too at this point. Maybe, maybe not. Tehran will be back presenting to our R795 class in a couple of weeks down the road, giving us tips about dissertation. Let me share my screen for a second, and if I can find the slides that I have called up here. There we go. This is called 20 Ways to Communicate with Your Dissertation Committee. Very important stuff. So let me just just roll through a little bit of this. Again, this will not be generalizable across all situations. Every committee's has different members, and you'll have different ways in which you want to communicate, different technologies you use, and so forth. So start with your advisor. Don't go to the other committee members with a question about anything important in your dissertation. Start with your advisor. Don't expect the other members to make a critical decision about when you're going to defend, about what the topic's going to be. I mean, they can help you, of course, but always try to start with the advisor, because in the end, anyhow, in the IST, anyhow, the advisor has the most power, has the most say. And so if you get your committee member to say one thing and then your advisor says something else, you'll be really confused. Now, you talk to your members of your committee and ask them questions, but just don't look at it as the final step in anything. The advisor typically is the one who makes the final decisions. But there are exceptions to these rules. If the advisor happens to be on a trip to Japan, like I was for a week and a half, and you have to get something decided and you can't get a hold of your advisor, well, then of course you're going to ask the other members for their best guess of what you should be working on next. So it's all within reason, all within a context. Like George said, it depends. Give your committee members at least a week or two to read the proposal. And a proposal is not as long as the dissertation. We typically ask for a whole month to read your dissertation. We typically ask for anyhow. I'm going to try to mute. We've got a couple of people I can hear in the background there. We've got muted there. So try and ask for, a month. Sometimes you only need a week or two to read it. Don't give it to your advisor on Friday and ask them to read it by Monday. It's not going to happen. You're going to cause a lot of tensions that you don't need. And I'll come back to that point. But be within everything's within reason. And no, for me, these are guidelines. These are not hard and fast rules. I mean, everything's bendable in some way, right? So, don't get overly panicked if you miss things by a day or two. Faculty are usually pretty reasonable in working with you, especially in the education field. But give 1 month to read a dissertation. Give a couple weeks to read the proposal. But again, some students, you give us a little less than a month, but you have to announce it you have to announce the defense a month before you defend. So you already have to know what your data is going to be like. At times, use a quick email. People like to use Doodle to schedule meetings. I find sometimes I can just call my advisor up or members and say, hey, you just happen to be available next week, Friday, rather than sending the Doodle and all these schedules and all this. Sometimes you can handle it on the side, the meeting times. You can sometimes meet in their office real quick, or send a quick email, or send a text message, maybe even. You don't necessarily need something fancy and sometimes we have EDDs have 3 members of the committee, PhDs has 4 members. Sometimes your advisor will say, well, let me walk down the hall and talk to Dr. Kwan and see if he can also meet next Friday. And then we only have 2 members left. We already know you can meet next Friday and Dr. Kwan can meet. So Bonk and Kwan are done. Now I need 2 more for my PhD. If you're EDD, now I need 1 more. So try and get a couple of quick things so you kind of not waiting forever on everybody. Use various forms of communication that your advisor prefers. If your advisor likes mobile phone, texting, well, it's fine. If he likes WeChat, if he likes Kakao Talk or Line, social media, that's fine. If he likes to have face-to-face meetings, or she likes face-to-face meetings, find out what the advisor prefers. Now, while they might prefer something, they'll be willing for another form of communication. Don't be restricted. And then when the advisor or committee members finish the meeting with you for a proposal or for anything, summarize what just was said. And you might summarize right there at the meeting, or you might summarize in an email message that night and send it to everyone the next day. So try and get an agreement as to what everyone said and what everyone expects and so forth. That's really helpful. At least things won't be miscommunicated or misunderstood or have misconceptions. Or you won't totally eliminate them, but you'll reduce them. So it's a great way to kind of go from there. And then Kurt prefers sending the completed project, not every page that you write, not even every chapter that you write. I prefer to get the whole dissertation and read it all at once, rather than get chapter 1 and chapter 2, and then maybe parts of chapter 3, and then the rest of chapter 3, and then it gets confusing getting all these parts. You know, if you're not in panic mode, if you're not overly stressed out about everything, then just send it in bigger batches. If you're really stressed and panicking about finishing and you got a job waiting for you, then you might send it chapter at a time. Or if you've got major revisions, then you might send it a chapter at a time. But if you're kind of just going through the process for the first time, I would try and complete as much as you can before sending it to an advisor. That's me. Your advisor might say something different, okay? These are my recommendation. If research questions or the instruments you're using, if the methodology changes, right? If the subjects you have are not, sorry about that. If the subjects you have are changing, if you're now studying K-12 students and not college students, you're going to need to get committee approval. If your research questions change, you're going to need committee approval. And at Indiana, in IST, I'd say the number one thing I see people change is the research questions. Faculty love changing research questions and fine-tuning them, and making them better. We try and make them better. I'm not sure if we always succeed, but that's the goal. If you've got a new instrument, a new survey, a new test, a new questionnaire, you make sure the committee approves it. So just communicate about what you're doing, about what changed. The committee is usually right. More often than you expect the committee to be right. Sometimes it sounds like a stupid idea. Why did the committee member ask? Why did Dr. Bunk ask for that? I have no idea what he was asking for. But usually the rest of the committee is usually correct in asking you to do something additional or different than what you had planned to do. Just be a little bit flexible, not totally flexible, but a little bit flexible. And they'll be a little bit flexible and everything will be happy and fine. Officially speaking, the committee is right. Sometimes the committee is not right, but you just kind of smile at them. You walk home, you have dinner, you come back and think about it. Usually you get pretty close. Be honest about issues that come up. Like you might have, like yesterday or Sunday, I had a car was broken down. I mean, it was busted. I had to get it fixed, Well, you might have issues like that. You might, might have your relatives visiting unexpectedly for a week, and that might put you behind in writing your paper or whatever. You might have other issues that pop up. Maybe you get a new job assignment, something new at work. This often happens where students think they're going to finish a dissertation proposal or a paper, and then at work, they get new assignments. They get a new project or many projects. So be honest with your committee about the issues that have come up, about the delays, about the problems. It's better to be honest and genuine than kind of hemming and hawing and not telling them anything and all this. Better just to come out and say, hey, Professor Bunk, I won't be able to finish that proposal, even though it's scheduled because of this or that. Rather be genuine, be honest, even if it shows a weakness, but it's okay. If you got a new job opportunity, if you're wondering what to do about that new job opportunity and it comes up, don't bother the committee unless it seems likely that you'll get the job. If they've just advertised the job, you might talk to your advisor and say, I'm thinking about applying for it, but I mean, there's so many people applying. Like someone told me they have a job opening, they have 90 people applying. Well, George Veletsianos, they had 90, he said. They had 90 there. So the chances of getting any job that you apply for are pretty slim. Don't get stressed until you get called for an interview. Don't even tell your advisor about a job you're thinking about applying for unless you want to have a conversation, but don't stress your advisor out that you might not finish your dissertation because there's a possible job at, in the Chicago Museum of Art and Sciences that looks really cool that you never thought would come up and you're going to apply. Well, if you haven't, I mean, gotten an interview, don't worry about it. Try to apply for the job, get an interview. When you get an interview, then tell your advisor about it. Don't expect the committee to jump every time you say the sky is falling. Every time you say I've got a problem. Every time I say I got an issue. You know, some dissertations are going to be more difficult than others. You might lose access to one of the populations that you're going to study. You don't have to tell your committee every small problem, but big problems you do tell them, like losing access to your subject pool. That's a bigger problem. But the littler problems, I wouldn't get, jump up and down and call your advisor and say, you can, within reason, if you have a weekly meeting or a monthly meeting with your advisor, then you can tell them if it's a small problem. You just wait. But the big problems, yeah, but don't make it sound, we've all heard, well, we've heard, I've been on over 130 dissertations. I've heard lots of stories. Find out from the other committee members what their preferences are for communication, and what their secondary preferences are. So not just your advisor, but what about the other members? And, it may depend upon their generation. Some generations, they don't use mobile as much, and other generations like don't use text messages. They might like phone calls, Always send a thank you to the committee. Send multiple thank yous, even at, some small thing that might be resolved, you can still send a thank you on email, something that acknowledges that you are grateful for the advices that you're getting, for the assistance that you're getting, for their time and effort, and that kind of thing. They might be reading your dissertation on a Sunday afternoon. You should be, thanking. Start with something social oftentimes, and greeting them, and something maybe in your personal life or something social that's happening at Indiana. But we like to hear a little bit of the social life and what your interests are and your hobbies are. That's not wasting our time. Sharing some personal things that are maybe have a similar interest. Some of my students might start a running streak. I'd be very interested to see if someone did, and share notes. And again, I've said this several times in different ways. Avoid overwhelming and overtelling too much. I was on 10 dissertation committees last year that finished, 13 the year before. So I was reading a lot of dissertations. So I just want to get the final product and read it and go to the defense. I don't need to get overwhelmed with all the things, but I do want to maybe find out a little bit along the way. So there's a happy medium between telling your committee about your progress and overtelling. Tell the committee when you have IRB approved. Now, this is really important. If you have your human subjects approved, try get it approved before you defend your dissertation. Try to get that, human subjects, the review board, and we're going to have Adam come in here. Adam Mills will be coming in a couple of weeks to tell us about human subjects. But let's see, what day is that Adam's coming to join us? On February 13th. So in 2 weeks from today, we will hear about from a human subjects expert, and whether your dissertation or any research you do is exempt with minimal risk, whether it's expedited with not great risk, research with existing documents collected from non-research purposes, blah, 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 it's expedited. Research with de-identified records, anonymous surveys, that's exempt. And then full board reviews, something that real serious, often psychosocial, emotional, or medical kinds of research would be full board. So tell your committee when you got it approved. That's really important. Once you get it approved, clear sailing, right? Once you pass your proposal defense, usually the rest of it is downhill somewhat. That getting ready for the proposal, writing that proposal. That's why they have a whole class on writing a proposal, this class, right? Because if you got a proposal and the committee approved it and you have access to the subjects, you're halfway home, more than halfway home, barring catastrophes that might happen. Collect pilot data and extra data sometimes can be helpful, and you can get extra pilot data published. So you might do an interview of a small group maybe 5, 6 interviews of your larger population, right? You might collect some surveys that don't go in the dissertation other than as pilot data, so you can refine the survey based on what the pilot indicates. And this will help you with planning. This will help you with understanding the efficacy of the instruments that you've selected and the procedures that you're going through. Highlight, don't hide changes in your manuscript. Don't play hide and seek. Be very explicit with your committee that if you've changed the proposal from the proposal to final dissertation, you've changed the literature review, you might want to highlight the pages that have changed. If you defend your dissertation and 3 weeks later you finalize the changes, you might track the changes, or you might highlight, I prefer to highlight in yellow or blue, the changes in the dissertation so that they can read it quickly and pass you. Don't hide, even if it's small, well, some small little grammar things maybe you don't have to hide, but I try and highlight every kind of change that I've done so the committee is aware of what I've done. The committee may be an expert, but you will still need an advisor to approve what you recommend. So I may be an expert in MOOCs. You might be studying MOOCs, okay? Ed might go, I want to study MOOCs in a corporate setting. I'm sure Ed's not going to study MOOCs. So he knows I might be an expert at MOOCs, but he has a different chair of his committee. I might be an expert, but it's still the chair or the advisor that needs to approve things before. Don't rely on just me if I'm a third member or fourth member or second member. It's member number 1 that's the most critical. No matter now, sometimes you have a director and a chair. Sometimes I'm the director of a dissertation. Like Dr. Pawan might be the chair, and she is the chair of one, where I'm the director because she used to be in language education and I'm not. And we have a language education student who wanted my help. And so she got me to be the director, but I could not chair because I was not from language education. Okay, that happens a lot. So you might have 2 people who are kind of like your advisors, and the director's more day-to-day. The advisor might be more like every month or 2 months you might see, so anyhow. So those are 20 tips about communication with your advisor, with your committee, that might help you expedite your dissertation. That's not the only 20 tips. Those are just 20 tips off of my brain. They're not from any paper. I didn't read any paper. I've not written this up. This is just based on experience. So Mika, do you have any, or Tiana, do you have any questions for me?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay. Katie?
And no, not yet. Just feedback. I just felt that it was very helpful, and I definitely see that the few points that you made are spot on.
You've
Spot on.
experienced it, huh?
Yes.
Okay.
They've been positive because I've been in touch with my committee members since I would say like for the past at least 2 years, and I always check in just to
Yeah.
make sure I'm building rapport. We're getting to know each other, letting them know, okay, clause will be R795 will be taken in spring of this year, and just making sure I understand how each individual wants me to communicate with them and approach my dissertation.
Yeah, don't be sneaky. Be genuine. Be just friendly. Just be friendly. Don't, if you've got a problem, I wouldn't hide. Unless it's a minor issue, you think you can fix it in a couple of days, and no one needs to know something that, maybe you lost a version of your proposal, and you got to get your new hard disk. Well, maybe you wait until you have the hard disk and see if they can repair your computer and salvage the proposal before you go tell everyone I've lost my proposal. It's my hard disk broke or whatever. Just wait until you've actually lost everything, and you don't need to panic everyone. And that happens. It happens to me. It happened to me a year ago. My hard disk went, and You know, I try and I'm making a backup tonight. I'm clearing space up right now is off of one so I can make a backup of everything. Some people put to the cloud. So that's a thing I haven't even talked about, how to make your data available through multiple formats. You know, to the cloud is one way. Sometimes before I go to bed, I send a version of whatever I'm working on to myself on email. I send myself an email message. That way I have the document in an email. So if my computer's fries, as my computer hard disk goes, I know there's another copy out there in my email, always ready for me, you see. I might send it to a friend and say, can you review this? Can you edit this paper? Can you read it? And that my friend then has a version and I have a version. Now I have a backup plan, right? You do the same. You know, just have a backup plans. You know, you never know when things will go awry, right? And for my visiting scholars, you know, again, when you're writing a paper to publish, being open and genuine and honest, you're a lot better off in making those revisions and getting things published. Last night, Maynard, Shishi, Lee, and I got a paper published because in part because we were very honest about the changes we made, what we couldn't make. We have a table that shows what the reviewers want, what we did. Just be, you know, in Dropbox, I have examples, I believe, not only dissertation proposals, not only dissertation perspectives and dissertations. I have examples of revision tables, how students revise their paper, how faculty revise their papers, and the revision tables will give you, you know, the points and the changes and the language that you use. The language that you use, thank you for making that suggestion. That's very insightful. We hadn't thought, I'm sorry, I apologize, we hadn't thought about that issue. Thank you for pointing it out. Don't use the same phrasing, trying to vary the phrasing, try to be nice, but just try to address every point that's made. And the same holds true for dissertation. There'll be 15, 20 points that the faculty will want you to change in a dissertation, sometimes a lot more. You just lay it out, what changed, and just share then with your committee the changes that were made, and then a clean version, and then a highlighted version or a track changes version so that they can approve it rather quickly. Okay. Other comments? The other thing I wanted before we go tonight, I haven't had a chance to fully read this. I've been in meetings all day. I sent you this, and it's an article about from Inside Higher Ed, January 30th, so it's today. Frustrated with your dissertation chair. Now, I know none of you are frustrated with your dissertation chair, or maybe you could be. And here's 3 strategies to help strengthen the relationship with your advisor. And so you might want to read through this. I'm just going to, you know, I can call this up. I think I have it. I can share my screen. I might have it here in one of my windows to share. Here it is. Can you see that, Alicia?
Yeah, it's clear.
Great. I had my assistant Seth make a PDF of this, so so you would have this. So let's see what this article says to do. Yeah. Student, Dr. X, here is my dissertation proposal. It is 80 pages for your review. It'd be nice to get feedback by Monday. It's Friday. Dr. X, looking at the clock on their computer, well, it is 5 p.m. on Friday, and this is expectations unrealistic. I'll give you my feedback in 3 weeks. Don't expect feedback to come immediately. You know, we try as quick as we can, but, you know, I think you know, when I was hired initially, it was about a month. Now things are a little quicker, I think, than they used to be. I think people's sense of time is pace and everything. The society is moving quicker than it was a couple decades ago when I was hired in here. So all this stuff about dissertation is kind of left out of, you know, we don't talk about that all that much. So let's see what they say. So develop expectations in collaboration with your chair. Establish clear expectations. It'll make your life easier. And so you may even feel that you should not have to take the lead in those conversations. Often I'm surprised faculty members don't initiate more interactions with students. this is true. Faculty sometimes don't have time to interact, but what I do, I've got every student written on a piece of paper in my pocket. And then I look through my list of what students I'm working on. And here's my list of all my students. So it's in my pocket. And then I look at my list, who haven't I talked to lately? And then I send them an email or I, text them or something. I get a hold of them. And so, that's one way I keep on top of things, but some faculty don't do that. So, some faculty don't initiate conversations. So doctoral students who finish quickly with minimal frustration recognize the importance of having such conversations about expectations, about their plans, of planning ahead in the dissertation process, planning, the next, phase of the dissertation, data collection, data analysis, writing chapter 3, chapter 4, and so forth. Here's some guiding questions you might consider when setting expectations with your chair. Question 1, what is your typical response time on emails? and Lena knows my response time is 60 seconds, but sometimes. And at what point can I resend an email if I do not get an answer? Well, that's interesting. I never thought about that, but if you don't get an answer within a few days, you might send a follow-up question. Most faculty deserve 48 hours, actually. How long does it generally take to provide feedback on written work? Again, it depends, but should be a maximum of a month, unless it's summertime. Typically, it's going to be 2 to 3 weeks, typically. Sometimes it could be a few days, but typically 2 to 3 weeks, up to 4. It shouldn't take longer than that. Would you prefer to read my dissertation chapter by chapter, or do you want to read the entire thing all at once? I like to read it all at once. Sometimes you read chapter by chapter. If it's a long dissertation, especially if students have writing problems, then I might read it chapter by chapter and get it edited and so forth. But students should get an editor for their work. And there are people that will edit dissertations, and you can pay for them. So your faculty member is not, I edit them, but the faculty is not supposed to be the editor of a dissertation. How often can you meet to discuss it? That's a question, and advocate for some kind of time frame. That's just a starter list, they said. The second is to keep communication open. While students often think about the dissertation process as a thinking and writing activity, one of the core skill sets that you'll need to complete that process and prevent frustration is communicating with the chair. Found that students who keep lines of communication open stay in their professors' heads. So at the start of the semester, send them an email, near the start. Schedule a meeting in the calendar, maybe sometime along the way when you need it. Don't just have a meeting for the sake of having meetings. We have plenty of meetings. Have it be substantive, something you want to cover. As you near the date, you might send a reminder of that and so forth. This end of semester email is especially important because, especially for summertime or winter break in Korea or China, before you go to break, you might send them a communication of how far you've come, and what you plan to finish, what your expectations are. As a professor, I know that faculty members are bombarded with these things over and over. Read a dissertation draft can slip through the cracks. So you want to schedule things. Sometimes you want to tell them, I'm not available in early April. Every year I go to AERA or I go to this particular conference in October. I will not be available in mid-October. I will not. So yeah. Third of 3, take the initiative to develop a plan. I often describe a doctoral journey as driving a car from point A to point B. As a PhD student, you're often in the back seat. When you start the program, your professor's in the front wheel in the front seat. They are guiding you to get into the front of the car, right? They're guiding you in new terrain. By the time you get to the dissertation, you have shifted things. You're in the driver's seat. Your chair is now in the front seat, but you should be in control of the driver's seat with GPS guiding you. Unfortunately, some students remain in the back seat during the entire doctoral journey, even though there is often an unspoken expectation for them to take the wheel when they begin to write their dissertation. So now, rather than waiting on your chair to tell you what the next task should be, take some ownership, develop a plan, the next step, timeline. Just share a timeline with the faculty members And put the timeline on your refrigerator. Put the timeline in your bathroom. So you look at the timelines, change the timelines. And then your chair wants to see you blossom into an expert. They want to see you growth and all that. And so you can take control. You should do some self-directedness, self-directed learning, right? And developing that plan is part of that. And refining the plan is part of that. So the tumultuous path that settles students with the infamous all but done dissertation, ABD moniker, does not have to be your path. The hope is that you will finish your dissertation and make the most of the experience along the way. Because your research can change people's lives, can change communities, can change organizations you care the most about. Raymond Goings, Associate Professor of Language, Literacy, and Culture doctoral program at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, a founder of Done Dissertation. He has a website called, you might type this in, Mika, Done Dissertation. He's out there in Maryland where you are. See if he has a website and share that with us in the chat. So that's today's news. What's that?
No, I said will do.
Yeah. And so that's just today's news. I thought I'd throw that in there since it was current. Any final comments or questions? Next week, we're going to meet at 1:15 and hear about AI tools that can help you in writing, AI tools that can help you write your dissertation. Zihang Zhao, my former student, is a wonderful presenter. She's won awards for her instructional design support. I am pretty darn sure she's going to design a nice tutorial for all of us so we can actually try it out. If you come to room, we're going to use a different room. We're going to use the Dean's Conference Room, okay? Or what was the Dissertation Defense Room, 2277 of the School of Education. 2277. It's next to where I think you had, if you were in the School of Ed today, it's next to where you had the lunch with the graduate students. It might be near that. So we're going to use that fancy room with fancy chairs and a fancy table. If you're coming online, it's going to be easy to connect you in hybrid. So we're going to have a hybrid class next week. The normal class we're in does work as well. It's just not as nice as what we're going to get for a couple weeks. We can't get it every week, but for a few weeks, we're going to switch to room 2277, 1:15. We're going to hear from Zihang. And after Zihang, I'm going to give you some other tips about defending a dissertation or some writing tips or something else that I'll be going through as well. A week from Friday, we'll not see each other next Tuesday. And then the following week, I think it's Mena Ju and I will talk about systematic reviews of the research and life of an early career scholar that Mena will talk about. She's been so successful. She's going up for tenure early. So next week actually is Zihang. The following week is Ana Paula Carrera from Ohio State, who's the advisor of one of the people we interviewed last week, and Adam Mills first. Well, Adam Mills, next week will be on Tuesday. 2 weeks will be on Tuesday. Next week will be on Friday. And so we'll hear about human subjects, and we'll hear from Anna about her research at Ohio State. And then in 3 weeks is Mena Ju and I talk about mixed methods design, systematic reviews of the research, life of an early career scholar, and that kind of stuff. So we got 3. And then, 4 weeks from now, I'm only going to meet with those dissertating one-to-one. We're going to have appointments with me in Zoom or face-to-face in a cafe. Anyone who's taking this class, business scholars are also going to meet with me one-to-one if you want. But the 4 weeks is going to be one-to-one meetings. We'll also have one-to-one meetings near the end of the semester. Professor Bowling, when she teaches this class, only does likes the one-to-one meetings, but I'm trying to have variety in here and bring people in. But this class is supposed to have some one-to-one kinds of meetings, so we will do that in 4 weeks. And I'll finish grading tonight and send everyone their papers tonight or tomorrow morning, that task 1 to everyone. Sorry for the delay for a few days. Final comments? That's a lot. So wave, everyone. We're going to say goodbye. I'm going to turn off the sharing screen here. So I'm going to stop the recording. The week 4, R795, spring of 2024. Thanks, everyone, for coming in this week. And thanks to George Veletsianos. It's great to have George with us. Bye-bye.